Welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. Today, we're going to be talking about 3 ways to stop being a victim. Now, I don't know about you, but I know there's been times in my life where I haven't liked what's been happening. And of course, it's been 100% somebody else's fault. Well, that leaves you in this space where you really don't know what to do, how to get out of it, how to change things. And it is absolute misery. Well, I'm a victim survivor. Like I have exited that seat and I'm living proof that you can too. We're going to dig into this topic today because if that's relatable to you at all, guess what? You don't have to stay there. And we're with my favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove. We're going to dig into this topic about leaving the trenches of victimhood and moving into a much healthier, more energizing, abundant life type place, and encourage you to move into there as well. So, Kyle, a lot of times people come see us because they're miserable. It
and
happens.
and we will leave it at that.
Yeah.
They're miserable.
Well, their identity gets wrapped up sometimes in the misery, and that's easy. That's pretty easy to happen to people. I mean, I think it happens all the time.
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, I doubt that any of us, when we, maybe we're exiting high school, had said to anybody, you know, 2 decades from now, I'd love for my identity to be that of a victim.
Oh my
I'm not
gosh.
sure I ever heard anybody say that.
Hmm.
But, when you said that, you said, I'm a survivor. Aren't, aren't we all?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've all been victimized legitimately.
Yeah.
And let's make sure that we, throw the disclaimer out there that says we're not saying there are no legitimate grounds or bounds for being a victim, because there are. We've
Hmm.
all been victimized, but living there is a different story. And although it's a choice, it's not always an easy choice to make, to step out of that rut,
Yes.
to step out of that place that becomes almost so familiar to us, it becomes our best friend.
To your point, I think it's worthwhile to take a second and say, real stuff has happened to you. And it's pretty normal to have a reaction to a good chunk of that stuff, right? I mean, I was raped
Absolutely.
in college. There was a different man I had to get a restraining order on. He followed me across the country. Like, I mean, there's crazy things that happen that you have next to no control over or influence around. There's stuff happening to our people in our country right now. They didn't choose, they didn't sign up. They're just walking home from work, or trying to get to their car. So, you've got that element in society, and then you have what happens in relationships.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where we're headed today is in your relationship. There's so much more that you can do. Like you don't have to stay stuck. I think that's probably one of the most rewarding things that we do in this line of work is to help people realize, oh my gosh, I don't have to stay here, and then help them move into that next space. So where do you want to get us going today?
Well, I think the obvious choice in order to not maintain the identity of victim is to uh, frequently listen to what to say and how to say it.
No,
I th-
shameless plug. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Um, and there are many steps that people can take to boost their confidence and their self-esteem, because let's face it, um, living in victimhood, or as I call it with my clients and myself, having been diagnosed with victimitis, is it's a lonely place. It's a miserable place, yet it's a chosen place. When all is said and done, to maintain the identity of a victim is a choice,
Hmm.
and to move away from that is also a choice. And every one of us has the power and the ability, if we'll take it and use it, to extract ourselves from victimhood and put ourselves in a place that's much more positive, much
Hmm.
brighter, has a future that is worthy of looking forward to rather than uh, avoiding.
Hmm. Yep.
And it's just a matter of accepting, seeking, searching for the education, and then putting feet to it, applying that to your own life. So it's not always easy, but the
Well,
steps are simple.
no, that's exactly, yes, that. There is an actual process and it's really simple. Execution's kind of challenging because we have some trenches in our brain of behavior and thinking, but it is possible. I'm living proof of that. I remember there were some serious times in my marriage that I just felt like it was all my husband's fault. All of it, which, as both you and I know doing this work, that's not mathematically possible. Like relationally, no, it's not always one person's fault. It just isn't. And so realizing that I needed to stop blaming him, and because he was going to be who he was and how he was, and the only thing I could do anything with was what I was going to take action on or think about. That was empowering. And it sounds like a terrible thing to be like, oh, so they're not accountable for anything. It's like, no, that's a different thing. And we'll get to that today. We'll get to the accountability piece. But there's a first step here that you mentioned earlier when we were talking about this that I think is just key. And I'm going to let you say it because people are probably sick of me saying it.
Well, as much as we do want to focus on the person or the people or the situation where we became victimized or we felt victimized, in spite of how manipulative or passive aggressive or even as how much of a bully someone may have been to us in the past, the first, I think the most important step, I don't think you really go much further with anything until you have taken this step. And that is, understanding that I have to be responsible. We have to take responsibility and accountability for our own choices and actions. And there's, like you just said, there's not a one of us who can say, well, my choices and actions have always been just as pure as the driven snow. I haven't made bad choices and actions here. This
Mhm.
is 100% on the shoulders of the other person in the relationship. But even if it was, you have the power to change your circumstances.
Mhm.
And it's not up to somebody else to come do it for you. And so, regardless, it's not, but even if it was, the first step is the same anyway.
Mhm.
You take a hold of the situation. If you're being honest, you accept the fact that you do have accountability. You do have responsibility in this situation in places, and you do the very best you can to leave those types of choices and actions and decisions and behaviors behind you.
Yeah.
And you begin on this journey of a new mindset and a new set of circumstances.
I remember there's been a couple of relationships that I've had with people that who turned out to be kind of toxic. I had somebody on my team that really was a bully and was doing all sorts of stuff. And I was constantly surprised by the behavior. Like I was just shocked by it. And then I had a moment of awareness because I kept thinking, this will stop. Like she's a Christian. She has to not do that. you know, and I would pray for her that she would have an awareness around it, right? Um, Nothing happened. It just kept getting worse because I didn't know this at the time, but what I was doing was condoning the behavior by not addressing it. And so finally I pulled her off to the side and I said, you got to understand, this is not going to fly here anymore. You can't keep doing this. And she'd have some sort of emotional drama thing right before we were going to teach a class, like in 20 minutes before the customers would start showing up. She'd be like melting down over one of our leaders publicly, in the team. And finally, I just said, it didn't occur to me for months that I had to take responsibility for it. I just kept thinking, well, God, you're going to fix this. I did the same thing in my marriage for a while. I was like, well, God, you're going to fix this. And I would complain, and then I would think that would fix it, and it didn't. It really did not. And somebody told me, if it's going to be, it's going to be up to you. You're endorsing this, you're enabling this. Basically, you're creating this. I'm like, "Ah, but they're blah, 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 blah." And they're like, yeah, what are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
Ah, that was brutal, but it was true.
But, also, I think one of the things that we don't take into consideration is how being a victim perpetuates itself. Because when we act like a victim, think about this. One of the things we want to do when we're stricken with victimitis is we want to make sure that all the people around us know about it.
Hmm.
You know what happened to me, right? You know what these
Yeah.
people did to me, right?
Yeah.
Oh, or this person, we and it's not a good look. Not at all.
Yeah.
Nobody likes it. Nobody wants to be around it, especially when that's about all they see from you.
Well, and it's sinful. We're not
Yes,
to slander
absolutely.
or gossip. We have a rule in one of our classes that, well, all of our classes, you don't husband bash. And I'm very controlling about, like, I interrupt couples in our marriage intensive. I'm like, hold on, where are you going with that? Like, is this honorable? Do those
Mhm.
specifics need to be shared here? Like, come on now. Because when we get so specific about the details, it makes our spouse look terrible, but the communication of that makes us look like a child. And
Absolutely.
uh, and the enemy uses it. It's not good.
Yep. No question about it. But I also think that after we humble ourselves and, get to the point where we say, okay, look, I take accountability and responsibility for choices I've made, things I've said, behaviors that I've had, attitudes that I've carried. That at that point we can begin the second part of the process, which, in my opinion, the next most important thing is to begin setting boundaries,
Hmm.
um, and uh, and to assert ourselves and understand there's a huge difference between an assertive behavior and an aggressive behavior.
Yes.
Okay, and to assert myself means for me to share my needs and my limits with you in a way that still respects you and your dignity.
I love that.
Okay. In spite of how upset I may be with you or how angry I may be with you or hurt, I'm not going to bowl into you and say, this is what you're going to do. You should have been doing it anyway, and blah, 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 or
Yeah.
whatever the case might be, where there's no respect whatsoever. And I'm not saying necessarily that other individuals who've been on the other side of this victimship or victimhood deserve to be respected. But you as an individual want to look at yourself and you want others to see you this way as well. You want God to see you as someone who respects the dignity of other people, whether they
Hmm.
deserve it or not.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you, I've had these experiences myself through years and years of practice. And I'm not talking about counseling, I'm talking about in real life
Yeah.
outside these walls. And I've also, been a wonderful part of facilitating changes in others, that when they become assertive rather than aggressive, it is shocking
Hmm.
to see how much more frequently we're able to accomplish what we're asking for or what we need. It's mind boggling to see how frequently people will respect our limits when we share those with them assertively rather than doing it the ugly way.
Yeah. And honestly, I think for me personally, I had a hard time not being ugly at first. Um, because it was so terrifying. I
Yeah.
knew I knew I had to say no, and I did it badly. Now I have better words for it. And I wasn't ugly all the time, but I certainly unfortunately know what that means. And I
Mhm.
don't recommend it because it doesn't really aid in creating an atmosphere of mutual respect. When you can say, hey, I love you. This isn't how we do things.
Right.
So I need you to rethink what you're about to do or what you're doing right now. And, and that's how I got past with that with my teammate. I basically just said, we're not doing, this isn't who we
Yeah.
are. We don't act like this. And, I think you're being messed with by the enemy, but we're done with these things right before class.
Right.
So you can talk to anybody about anything except on the night we have class. So I set up a boundary with that and it went pretty well. But it was such a small thing that made such a huge difference. And
Yeah.
it was terrifying to do even initially, but I'm really glad that we did.
Yeah. Well, the first question I ask anybody when the subject of boundaries comes up, which is every day,
Yeah.
for me, and that is, how often in this particular situation, in this relationship, how often do you say no? And people that think that heretofore they have been pretty good about boundaries
Hmm.
are suddenly cast into doubt
Right.
because when they say I not very often, or I don't.
Hmm.
Say I'm going to suggest that the likelihood is you haven't set effective boundaries, no
Right.
matter how much you think you have, or no matter how many times you have specifically set out to do just that. If you can't say no, or you don't say no, then the likelihood is that those boundaries are just as porous as the day is long.
Well, and you see that with people that feel like they're being taken advantage of all the time and they're
Yeah.
exhausted. And it's like, well, you're doing a lot. Yes, I am. Well, why are you doing all that? Well, people need me to do all this. Well, what if you said no to some of these things? Well, I can't. And I said, well, you understand you're choosing what you're getting. There's so much fear wrapped up in what will people do if I say no? It's like, well, they'll learn to do things on their own. You'll empower them to have some confidence. They'll respect you more. You'll get some sleep. Like a lot of good will come out of that.
Yeah, but
Like,
if I say
try
no,
it.
they might get upset, or they might act out, or they might misbehave. And so what you're telling me then is that, okay, so keeping the peace is more important to you than getting out of the situation of being a victim. You'd rather be a victim,
Right.
than to have a bit of time where things are not all that stable or
Well,
peaceful.
and I think people don't realize that when people are used to us just doing whatever they want, we've taught them that we can be taken advantage of,
Mhm.
that their natural response is going to be grumpy about it. And that's normal. And that allows them the opportunity to mature, hello, and realize that other people are important too. Like, how do we expect them to learn how to take better care of themselves and us if we're doing everything for them?
Yeah.
And it's not going to be pleasant for them. They're now going to have to do some work. It's like being
Mhm.
9 years old and your dad's telling you to go sweep the steps again because you didn't do it right, and you're like, oh, well, okay, and so you go do it, or you can't have a piece of dessert twice. It's like, really, that's what immature people do. So expect that response, let
Yeah.
it roll. People will level up. That's not your problem.
Glad you said that, because I think, there are basically two audiences with whom we set boundaries. One is people we hope we never see or hear from again. Yeah. And the other audience, though, is people that are part of our lives. Maybe we even love them.
Hmm.
Maybe they're even our spouse. Okay. So it's hard to understand and hard to come to terms with the fact that the outcome for them when you set a boundary, it's not your responsibility.
Yep.
It's not your problem. I like to say, it's not my circus, not my monkey.
Yep. I love that.
And but it's hard to put yourself in that position to say, I'm going to set this boundary, and I know it's going to cause ripples, but the ripples that it causes are probably necessary, and the outcome of those, I, you know, I can't hold myself responsible or feel guilty about.
It's part of that iron sharpening iron thing.
Yeah.
Saying no to somebody causes them to have to level up. And I'm not saying you should suddenly just not serve anybody in your family. Like, that's not what I'm suggesting at all.
Mhm.
And there definitely is a culture within the church that women are supposed to say yes all the time, 100%, end of conversation. That's submission. And that's not true.
No.
Because if you're serving yourself into exhaustion, you're not taking care of the temple, which I think God cares about. a lot. So, and I think Jesus modeled that because
Mhm.
he slept even when there's storms and stuff was happening, like he's taking care of himself. So anyway, I like that. He modeled that for us. And I think he modeled it for women too. And that's all I'll say about that today.
Well, I'm going to move on because I'm
Yeah,
certainly not going to get caught in a trap.
yeah, yeah.
A last thing I'd like to just throw out there today is that um, in order to move away from this victim status, it's imperative that you take on the task of challenging your own negative thoughts and beliefs about yourself,
Mhm.
because we don't like being a victim. But if you spent much time being a victim, then you begin seeing yourself that way. And if you see yourself that way, then you think of yourself that way. And those are negative and they're self-defeating. The last thing that I'd like to throw out there today is to challenge the negative and thoughts and beliefs that we gather about ourselves, and be able to understand the longer that I've been in victimhood, the more of these thoughts and beliefs that I have, the more I see myself as a victim. And as soon as I see myself that way, then that's my identity. So I'm going to behave that way. My attitude is going to reflect it. There are just going to be a lot of pieces and parts of me that scream victimhood. Um, and until I challenge those negative thoughts, those ants we've talked about before, the automatic negative thoughts, and got to throw some ant poison in there. Got to get rid of them and replace those with realistic perspectives, because most of what we see about ourselves as a victim is unrealistic. The longer we've done it, the more unrealistic it becomes,
Mm.
because what we are doing is perpetuating the behavior of others by allowing ourselves to maintain the status of a victim. Oh, look,
Yes.
that's a victim. And I'm talking, even in marriages, this happens.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily something that somebody strategizes, and thinks
Yeah.
out, says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get them real good.
Hmm.
It's something that we morph into, that we see easy ways to get what we want. We see ways to manipulate and to achieve the things that we desire, and not really give much credence to the things that others do. And as long as they'll allow us to continue, well, it's really easy to do it.
Hmm. Well, and I see people usually when they start with this, and it's not everybody by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes you see people come in and they're like, well, my spouse doesn't love me. And it's like, well, how do you know that? Well, they don't pick up after themselves. They leave their coffee cup on the counter instead of putting it in the dishwasher.
Mhm.
It's like, what? Yeah, well, if they cared about me, they wouldn't leave that for me to do. Not knowing that their spouse is intending to use that later for tea or maybe a cup of
Exactly.
water. They only want to dirty one dish, like who knows? But usually there's a good reason for it. Or it's just absent-mindedness, but personalizing all of that stuff in a negative way about us, that's so common. And it's craziness because we're not in that person's head. We don't know what their intentions are, but we're twisting it into something negative I mean, I've watched people spiral like in 6 sentences from, well, they did this thing and then they don't love me. It's like, wait,
Wait,
wow.
that was a leap. Yeah.
Yeah, that happened quickly.
Yeah.
Um, and most of the time, like 65% of the time, when we think we know what our intimate partner is thinking or feeling, we're wrong.
Yes.
That's an F. Like if we're guessing, we're wrong. Like that's just assume that you're wrong instead of assuming you know.
Well, that's worse than an F, because that means only 35% of the time are you correct.
I know it's so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just terrible. So when we're looking at this, we really got to settle on there's hope. There's stuff that I can do about this. I don't have to stay stuck, and there's a process to it. And I really liked what you brought forth today because I see this process play out in our clients the same way you probably do in yours and in the marriages. Like they first have to take responsibility. That's so
Hmm.
huge for owning their side of the street and keeping it clean and the choices that they're making, setting those boundaries, even when it's hard and doing it in a respectful way. And then lastly, challenging the negative thought processes, which can be an all day, every 5 minute or sooner affair. If you don't like take some action on that, you're going to be stuck living this way, and it's going to get worse. You're going to be that grumpy old guy that get off my lawn, that guy. And you're like 6 feet away on the sidewalk and he's screaming at you because he just knows you're gonna step on his lawn.
That's right.
That's right, because that's how he sees. Like, these, we make fun of that, but those people are real, and they got that way by not taking those thoughts captive.
Yeah. I was having trouble even identifying with that because, it's August 27th here in West Texas and get off my dirt.
Ah,
There's not much lawn left at this point in the year.
yeah, we're crunchy too. I was going to ask you at the beginning, like, does your grass ever get green? Is it green in the spring?
It's green in the winter.
It's oh,
It's the strangest thing. If we had some very mild winters this past winter, and so I cut grass all winter long, once a week.
okay.
And then we get to the summer, and obviously it doesn't rain much here. And when I boarded a plane last week to go to a cooler place, it was 106 here. But we're doing
Yeah.
better. We've had a cold front come through, and we're just in the middle 90s now. So
Okay. Wow. I'm not man enough to live in Texas, I'll tell you that.
I'm not either, but
Oh,
somehow I
somehow you do.
depend
So
on it.
that's
Trust me. But
well, I appreciate the identity topic around victimitis today. How do people get a hold of you if they live in the great state of Texas, which it is a great state, and there are a lot of people. There's a lot of people in Texas, and you are licensed in that state to practice therapy and counseling. So how do these people get a hold of you?
how about they just email me at Kyle Hargrove LPC at gmail.com. And
Cool.
we'll chat a bit, and then any further instructions I can give them from there.
All right. That sounds great. And if you are not in the great state of Texas, maybe you should be. I don't know what real estate is like, but and then we just kind of did a bad ad for Texas about the weather and mowing in the winter like that. I don't know if that makes any sense. But if you're not there, you can go to greaterimpact.org, grab some free resources, but be sure to check out the next episode where we'll be talking about conflict and how do you not just survive, but thrive. That's the goal for everybody. Get out of the victim seat, survive, then thrive. Life abundant style with Jesus. All right. Thanks for popping by. We'll talk to you soon.